What I wanted to say, first of all, to all of you is a very sincere thank you for joining us. We are very, very well aware how busy you are at the moment, and particularly if you've just heard myself and Laura having a catch up with the arrival of foundation phase back in schools. I know that presents a new level of busy. But these webinars really have been designed to be helpful. They've been born of the feeling in the system that everyone's working really hard, and actually it's really helpful to have the opportunity to share what's going well, what we've learned, and the barriers that we found, and have the opportunity to discuss that and ask any questions that we might have. I'm very grateful to Laura and Vicky to agreeing / being slightly coerced into sharing the work that they've been doing in Nantgwyn, particularly around their primary live learning. So you will be relieved to know that you don't need to listen to me for too long, and I'm going to hand over to Laura and Vicky, who will be far more interesting and entertaining than I could ever hope to be. So I will put myself on mute and hand over to you both.
Lovely, thank you very much, Louise. Before Vicky starts presenting, I'm just going to get Vicky to introduce herself. I'm Laura Morris, I'm Deputy Head Teacher of Ysgol Nantgwyn, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about Ysgol Nantgwyn in a moment. But Vicky?
I'm Vicky Evans, Assistant Head Teacher in Ysgol Nantgwyn also. This is our presentation for how we've been delivering online learning through our through school, from nursery right up to year 11.
Okay, thank you. We are actually, just to bring everybody up to speed, we are actually sat here in Holly and Phil formation, and Vicky is in charge of all IT matters. So Vicky's going to pop the PowerPoint on, but while she does that, I'll just give you a little bit of information about Ysgol Nantgwyn so you can understand our context really and where we're coming from. We're a new school and we're in the heart of the Rhondda Valley. We are halfway up a mountain, which means that it brings with it the very worst of the weather on every single day possible. It's quite interesting, the clothing that you have to buy in order to work here and make it out in one piece. We opened in September 2018. And we are a 3 to 16 school, and we have a nursery creche facility on site with Flying Start provision there as well. We're really proud of the work that we've done since we've opened on developing a full curriculum continuum. And not just the curriculum, the way that we work more generally, everything that we do applies across the whole 3 to 16 continuum. So a behaviour system, a reward system is applied equally to 3-year-olds as it is to 16, and you can imagine there'll be various sorts of nuances there as to the implementation. But what that's meant for us is that we've had to do an incredible amount of learning since we've opened. So we're in our 3rd year of opening now, and our staff have worked really hard together to work through the change of being primary practitioners and or secondary practitioners to being through school practitioners, to developing our own curriculum and working through what works about that and what doesn't work about that. And we're a long way from being complete, and I don't think there's any such thing as a complete continuum, but I'm sharing that with you so that you know that our staff over the past 2 years have just been absolutely incredible in working together collaboratively to bring about positive change for the children here. It's not been without its hurdles, and it's not been without barriers at different points. We've all felt a bit nervous about different things, but I think that what we do have here is we have a real culture of learning and a real will to work together to find the thing that does work for our children here, and recognise that that's not necessarily the same thing that works in the school even just half a mile down the road. Ysgol Nantgwyn itself, if we can just move on to the next slide, Vic, please. We are a yellow school, that's our categorisation, if we're still talking about that. We have just under 1,100 pupils. We've grown from being 960 when we opened, so a reasonable growth in that period of time. And around about 50% of our pupils come from one of the most deprived areas in the whole of Wales. So that gives you some information about the sort of the social and economic makeup of the area. Before lockdown, our FSM was just over 30% for the full through score. After lockdown, we haven't actually got an exact figure at the moment, but it is increasing. Our families have suffered quite a significant amount of financial change in this period of time. We, on opening, tested our children on reading, obviously not on the first day, because that wouldn't have been fair. But our children came in with a significant skills deficit. When we opened in 2018, less than 15% of our children were reading at their chronological age. We've made significant progress with that now, and we're up to over 80%. But all of those details kind of give you a bit of a flavour of the type of school we are. It's a values community. It's a very, very close community. We tend to teach the brothers, the sisters, the cousins, the aunties, the uncles. You know, there's so many links into so many parts of the community, and that's really, really beneficial for us in so many ways. We've worked over the past year, and you'll see a couple of slides further along, to develop our remote learning approach and our on-site approach and our bit of a mix approach, and you know, all of the different approaches that we've all had to start to explore over the past year. But what we got to at a point around about the end of the summer last year was a pupil entitlement for all children who come to Ysgol Nantgwyn. And this entitlement applies whether you're 3 years old or 8 years old or 11 years old or 14 years old. And an awful lot of work has gone into developing this in terms of, you know, looking at the provision and the many iterations of the provision, because what we're doing now isn't what we were doing last March. It isn't what we were doing last October, but we've just taken all of the points that have worked for us and we have built it into a pupil entitlement, using also information from pupils and from parents as well. And what we have now is a mantra that our remote provision mirrors the on-site provision. Okay, so what that means to us is that if Tuesday on-site looked a particular way, that Tuesday off-site would look the same way. Now, obviously, there are differences. You know, children are in classrooms, they're not in classrooms. They're at home, there are different types of equipment, and the type of learning that they're doing is different. But in terms of their timetable, if they were due to have, you know, mathematics for a double lesson, and then English for a double lesson, and then Spanish for a double lesson, that is still what they have when they are at home. Across the day, and Vicky will go into a little bit more detail around this, around 50% of our provision is synchronous and is teachers live and interacting with children, and the other 50% is asynchronous. So generally the two things really sit together. And the teacher is working through synchronously. But what we've built to is a picture where staff are teaching in kind of the way so they're used to teaching in the classroom, and we've got this evolving practice with lots of learning coming out now, where children are able to continue to interact with their teachers in the way that they're used to. So their teacher will, you know, introduce something to them, and they will do a little bit of practice, and then they'll stay in the link with the teacher and just pop up and down when they need a little bit of help, and then the lesson will come together, and the teacher will move all of the children on. We have small group provision happening now, which is obviously something that happens when we're on site, but for a long time we weren't quite ready to do that from a remote perspective. But we have you know, a part of our primary timetable every day where children working in small groups with learning support assistants and their teachers, and that's a really important part of our provision, because, you know, ordinarily pupils are at different points and need different things at different times. What we found about remote learning is that it's just created an even bigger spread of what the children are doing. Staff are available at all points during the day, unless it's their non-teaching time, their identified PPAs. Quite often a member of staff will just stay in the link from the synchronous lesson, and what you find is that every now and again a child will pop back in to ask a question. All of the children will come back for a sort of a plenary review session at the end of the lesson, but you know, staff often will just, get on with a little bit of work and the children will just pop back in. Sometimes that's by email, sometimes it's via the platforms that we use, either Seesaw or Classroom. The key thing for us is that the provision fits the pupils rather than the pupils fit in the provision, and that's been something that we've developed over time. Very, very honestly, and Vicky will talk you through the stages that we've gone through. When we first started, staff were horrifically nervous to go on Google Meet, and I include myself in that. So we started working in a way that suited our staff, and gradually over time they have taken feedback from their pupils and they have evolved their practice. But it's been absolutely critical to us that the members of staff have been, the very, very centre of that. We've moved into a sort of more differentiated practice. I'm not embarrassed to say that, in our first lessons it was very different. It was checking in, it was introducing a set piece of work for the whole class. But our primary teachers now have moved back to their general classroom practices, where they have children in different groups, and the groups are different for different skills and different subject areas, and the work it might be different, or the level of support might be different, or the way that they do it might be different. There's a whole bunch of ways that staff are working with children to make sure that it fits that child as best it possibly can.
So here you can see the stages of our development in sort of bite-sized chunks, as it were then. They're very punctuated points, generally at half terms, start of terms, whereby we have evaluated our practice, taken feedback, spoken to parents, spoken to pupils, spoken to staff, and decided what really the next stage would be. Now you can see the very first stage there. Actually, for us, it began before closure. We could all see in the news from the continent, etc., that something was coming, and actually it was a year ago this week whereby a discussion was had that perhaps we might need to start thinking about how we will teach remotely. The initial focus before closure was just what can we use, how can we use it, and practicing. So upskilling our staff, upskilling pupils as well, making them comfortable with various platforms. We opted to go with Google, but obviously an array, we could have used any number of platforms. And initially, just before we stood out, it was about developing our confidence. So as we were said, initial lessons were primarily well-being checks, a few activities, but not as much differentiation as we're now able to do with small group provision and so on. As the last year has progressed, we have evolved this. And moving into this academic year, we hoped that we wouldn't go back into another full lockdown, but as is the case, we have. So we really needed to refine what we were doing last year and continue to move it forward, as we would in ordinary practice, whereby we would continually be evaluating and moving teaching and learning forward. We needed to do the same for our online provision, for our remote provision, regardless of whether the children are in nursery, year 9, year 8, or even year 11. So again, it's about evaluation, getting pupil feedback, what was working, what wasn't working, and how could we refine it. We are now at the stage where we do have more, I suppose, a feel of normal school life, whereby pupils work in different groups across the course of the day. They might have small group work. They may check in with a variety of staff across the day if entitled to an intervention for an additional learning needs. That now takes place. And so we're now really able to delve into assessment for learning and how that has progressed and evolved across the year.
This is one of our straplines, and we thought that we would share it with you. I mean, Vicky's just shared there, and it's an incredibly scary thought. It is around about this time last year that we stood in front of our 160 staff, and our phrase was exactly, we think this might be a thing, you know, this COVID thing. And we were starting to have conversations, and they're very different conversations now. I remember very, very clearly saying to the other deputy head here, wouldn't it be really wonderful, and you have to forgive my IT ignorance here, but wouldn't it be really wonderful if there was a thing that was like a TV, but, you know, the teachers could talk to the children through computers? And he said, yeah, you know, that's Google Meet, Laura. And that's the conversation where we really started to think about, okay, this is how we need to start looking. And really all of that half term last year, between February half term and Easter, we spent a significant amount of time, as Vicky has already outlined, just working with staff to make sure that they were as comfortable as they could possibly be with all of the different things that we were doing. We had various types of practice that made us laugh. They really made us laugh. So teachers would go outside their classroom with an iPad and teach a little bit of their lesson from outside the room, and the children didn't really understand because they were 5 years old and their teacher was 2 meters away outside speaking through an iPad and coming through the interactive whiteboard. We started having our staff meetings online as well, even though we were all in the building, just to make sure that everybody was able to do it. And you know, it took several weeks for some, myself included, but we got to a point where we were relatively comfortable. But I think for us, that level of staff training, for want of a better word, was absolutely critical, and the fact that we were able to do it when we were all together on site made a huge difference. What you'll see throughout the rest of the presentation, and I hope it comes through, is that we haven't really stopped learning. I don't think any of us as teachers, as educational professionals, have stopped learning in this period of time, have we? But we've worked really, really hard to have an ongoing dialogue, not just with our teachers, but with our pupils and our parents as well, to make sure that, you know, when we're trying new things, and we have had various iterations, that's a summary of the stages, we've made several different changes other than that, that we're getting that feedback to see, is, you know, we think it's working, do you agree? Or, you know, is there something that we need to do better? One of the things that stood us in really, really good stead as well is putting together stationery packs for children and sending those home, and we've actually done that probably about 4 or 5 times. And essentially, you know, a carrier bag just full of school equipment. And what we've said to our teachers, and we've been really, really clear, is that we need to minimise expectations on parents. So please don't set work where they need to print. You know, everything should technically be able to be done on a piece of paper, an envelope even, you know, with a pencil or a piece of paper, or even nothing, you know, through discussion and, you know, various different formats. But we wanted to make sure that all of our children had that basic equipment, and they had enough basic equipment. So we've kept on doing that as we've gone through.
Okay, as you can see there, this is the structure of our day for all of our pupils across the full continuum. We have 3 100-minute sessions, a 20-minute break and a 40-minute lunch. All pupils across the school are taught in this way. There's various reasons for that, but obviously as a through school, we have children that are in year 1 with a sibling in year 6 and another sibling in year 10. And by having this, it means our parents, our families, our communities aren't vying with multiple start times, multiple ends times. And so this is the structure we have gone with across the continuum. What this doesn't necessarily mean, though, is that if you are a 3-year-old, you are sat for 3 chunks of 100 full minutes in front of a screen. Similarly, nor is that the case if you are 15 and undertaking GCSEs. We have allowed some flexibility with teachers and being able to decide what proportion of lessons should be asynchronous and synchronous. And that flexibility is something that has been one of our iterations, which we didn't have originally. As you can see there, this is some of the guidance that we have put out to our staff. If 100 minutes is represented by one of these bars, there are a range of options as to how that 100 minutes could be structured. We say we would like a minimum of half of the lesson live teacher input. That doesn't mean the teacher is leading the learning the whole time, but they are available there on screen for the pupils. Some of our teachers, depending on the lesson, depending on the cohort, depending on the group, would prefer for the full 100 minutes, which is represented in the final bar as being live. However, there are other elements where it may be a starter activity, a bit of instruction, and then primarily the pupils are independently working. One thing we have mandated is that we would like a 10-minute check-in at the start, whereby registers are taken, and some of our support mechanisms kick into place, which we'll speak about in a few slides' time. And we have a session of retrieval practice there via Google Form or via a quiz, Quizlet, Padlet, Kahoot, etc., which is accessible across the continuum of learning, and it allows our staff to make sure that the pupils' learning is progressing, that they're not just being kept busy with activities. Similarly, we have the same expectation for 10 minutes at the end of every session, whereby we can do that check-in and a progress in order to effectively plan for the following day's lessons or the lessons that take place afterwards. So that feels more natural and more normal to our staff, which is what would normally happen on a day-to-day in the classroom. It would be unnatural ordinarily to plan without any progress checks, so that's one element that we've kept consistently in place across the school. Originally, we sort of divided up the timetable as to which lessons were going to be live, which lessons were going to be asynchronous, and through feedback from pupils and from teachers, it just didn't quite work. Pupils didn't like the fact that there were some lessons where they didn't see anyone at all live. They liked that check-in, and teachers found it difficult that they had to plan to the mandated timetable. So this allows more flexibility and allows a bit more control, and it also allows that kind of well-being check-in at various points throughout the day.
And I think now that we're going to introduce you to one of our teachers. Oh no, I've jumped ahead. Back to you. Sorry, Vicky.
We are going to introduce you to one of our teachers, who's just there on the screen. This is the guidance we sort of put in place, given out to all of our staff members. We developed this idea of 9 Ps. So one of the examples I've given there is pedagogy. We also have prompting, we have proof, pupil relationships, and so on. And what we wanted to put in place for all of our staff and all of our pupils was this focus of principles of learning as opposed to mechanics of a lesson, which I think is probably where we began. If we were being really honest, this time last year, it was just about getting through the mechanics of a lesson, make sure there's a starter, make sure there's an activity, make sure the children get busy, and then it's the end of the lesson. And that's to do with nerves, teacher confidence, and so on. But as time has built, all of our pupils now have this offer where we focus on principles of learning, our 9 Ps, and it's applicable to 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and 16-year-olds. We've put out guidance in this format for all staff. You can see that you have P, so pedagogy. Research, what does the research say? Because we're really quite passionate about having evidence-informed practice here and research-informed practice. And then we have a column with what does it look like for us in our school?
I seem to have lost a little bit of sound there, so I think you might have had a little bit of a connection issue then.
We did have a slight connection issue. I'm back in. I think, are you back in, Vicky?
Yeah, so.
Yes, I can see Vicky now.
There we go.
This is making blended learning, remote learning, the reality of what happens when the tech goes a bit wonky, isn't it?
It is. It's the
I
true
will
story.
remute myself.
There we go. So as you can see, yes, this is a live document, an interactive document, and it allows our teachers to access resources to make their lessons as easy as possible, really, and to share best practice. So this is a short video of one of our Year 3 teachers and deputy head of lower school. It's an edited video in terms of we just cut it down from the 5 hours that she was willing to share into 3 minutes. What you will see, and I think this is really important, is that this isn't perfect. We are not showing just the very best bits of her lesson. We are showing what we would like to show is a natural process whereby you will see some errors that she's got to share her screen. You'll see the progress coach interjecting, and it's not perfect, but it's important that this is shared. And just checking that you can see that on screen.
Yeah, it's there definitely. We're not getting the sound coming through from the video, so it might be that you need to toggle on your share screen your end.
So now I'll try again. I'll see if this works for you.
Josh is going to get up and dance. Elliot says, put that camera back on.
Perfect.
Cheating. Oh, good. Olivia Davis is there. Ready now then? Oh, Oliver's ready with the puppy. Let's go. Oh, good. Mason Watts is there. Good boy, Mason Watts. Right then. Oh, I haven't shared my screen, have I? Have I, Mrs. Roberts? No, I thought not.
No, you're off.
I'm off. Hold
Good
on.
morning, Liz.
Not on it today. Oh, Tom, give the dog for me, lovely. Hold on, Tom's just getting the dog for me as well. She's down two in the box. Right, to describe different aspects of a volcanic eruption. Now, if I pop into Seesaw, all right, can you see this in Seesaw? It's got volcano adjectives in there, all right? And if I go in and edit this in a minute, we can have a little look. Because Ben's got the words in front of him. I'm no Ben. All right, that's handy there, lovely. Now then, there's a PowerPoint, all right, that's attached. And we've got to read the words on the PowerPoint and put them underneath the right headings. So we've got the headings, what an eruption sounds like, what an eruption looks like, what a volcano looks like, and what lava is like, and how people might feel in an eruption. Now, if I pop into this here, make sure we can see it. All right, can you see these different headings? All right, okay. What a volcano looks like, what an eruption sounds like, what lava is like, how people might feel, and what an eruption looks like. And then on the other two slides, you've got words, right? That you need to sort out and put underneath the right headings. Okay, so if we have a little look at some of these words in here now, who can have a look at those words? Read me a word. Who can find a word and read it for me? Go on, Lily May, what words can you see, lovely?
Grey.
Grey, good girl, grey. What could that be used to describe? Would a volcano look? Oh, yeah. Lily May, how do you think they might feel? Yeah.
Scared.
Good girl, they might feel scared. Should we write that title down first, then we'll have a look for some words? How people might feel in an eruption.
Sorry to interrupt, Miss. I just found a video now of people that have witnessed a volcano explode.
Oh,
It's really short. Do you want me to put it over quick?
We're going to try writing a volcano poem. Shall I read you out this one that somebody wrote last year using adjectives? Violent volcano erupting with a loud sound. Out of the volcano, lava oozes out like a hot flaming lake, catastrophically destroying everything in its path. Awestruck and terrified people, noisy people.
So that's just a bit of a flavour of a year 3 lesson, and what you can see there it's as closely mirroring what we do in school every single day that we can possibly as we can currently make it with remote practice. So you've got a progress coach in there who will pop in and add to the lesson. You have got children being called upon and to respond. We've got demonstrations, we've got modelling, and we're trying to make it natural. And I think where we were at the start, we all felt very, I suppose, intimidated by online learning. And we all felt we had to record these absolutely perfect videos, and that isn't reality. It's not teaching and it's not real life. And this is where we're currently at. And the feedback we're getting is incredibly positive from our learners. Okay. Apologies, just a bit of a technical issue. Hopefully on screen you can see some of the collaboration evaluation activities that we have undertaken. So we've done an IT triage, just checking in September equipment and understanding and skills of pupils from their experiences before September. We've put out pupil feedback sessions, which we've got another one coming up in the next week. We've had several forms of teacher forum, small groups, whole group meetings, TLR holder meetings, parental questionnaires. And you can see there at the bottom that we have to keep asking the same questions because the answers are continually changing. As we can evolve our practice, the answers are changing over time for us. So we have to keep coming back to the same questions in a variety of forms.
I think that's a really important point there about how often we have to ask the same questions. But obviously we've got a range of ages here, but you know, we've given out a huge amount of IT equipment over time. I think at last count we've given out something like 470 something laptops or devices. But what we're finding is that for every sort of Google form or parent mail questionnaire we do that ascertains that we have no further need, we don't need to get any more devices out, there is another questionnaire that we send in 2 weeks' time that identifies another 8 children who possibly haven't felt confident to contact us and let us know that their device had stopped working for whatever reason. The collaborative evaluation activity has been really, really helpful. I mean, that sounds really, really formal, but you know, it takes a variety of different forms. And obviously, we've got our school calendar structure, which we've pared back a little bit this year, and so that we can really focus on our current priorities, but not forgetting our more medium and long-term priorities, of course. But you know, we're using our existing opportunities, we're using, you know, just things as simple as chats on corridors as well, but we're doing lots of things like questionnaires and focus group activities as well to make sure that we've got that constant flow of information. And I'm not going to go through everything the staff have said. You know, I think that, you know, I think almost every single member of staff would say that it has been a case of growing practice over time, that the support that we've put in place has been absolutely critical, and that's not support necessarily from senior leadership, it's from colleagues across the school and people having the opportunity to work with their peers. People have felt quite reassured that we're all in the same boat. So just as, you know, Vicky, but particularly I have demonstrated during this meeting that, you know, IT doesn't always go my way. It doesn't matter when things go wrong. We're just working together to try and make the very best of this situation. Staff have been involved in collaboratively developing everything that we've done, really. The teacher and learning guidance that Vicky shared with you, the pupil entitlement, everything has got input from staff in it, but equally it's got input from parents and pupils as well. And what you'll see from the next slide is that the feedback that we're having from, is it pupils and parents? So the feedback that we're having from parents is quite positive. We've gone out on a questionnaire to show that, basically to just get a feel for where we are. We've tried to keep it really, really simple. We find that with questionnaires, if we're asking more than 8 or 10 questions, then people get halfway down the page and they get a little bit bored, or perhaps it's a bit too much and they haven't got time for it. So we've stuck to really, really short questionnaires. But what we know from parents is that, you know, they feel that the balance of synchronous and asynchronous lessons is about right in about 3/4 of cases. You know, there will always be differences there. What we have done is we have spoken to parents where they felt it's considerably too much, and we've explored the reasons for that, and the same for the other ends of the continuum, really. And we've put in place adapted approaches for those children, and that's absolutely fine. You know, perhaps it's a case that, you know, we've got a very able learner that just needs a little bit more work, or a lot more work, as the case might be. And some other children need paring back, and sometimes that's because of ability and skill level, and sometimes that's because of family circumstances and situations, and it's really important to us that we take on board all of the information about our children and their circumstances. We know that parents are reasonably happy with the amount of work, but again, it's the same principle. We've picked up the phone and we've had conversations with them. The data there for roughly how long does your child spend on the learn on a typical day, you can see there's the whole school data there. So we have broken it down into different year groups, and we split our school into a lower school, a middle school and an upper school. And what we do know is that the older the child, the more time they tend to spend on learning, although that's not true in all cases, as you might suspect, but as a general rule, that's there. Looking at primary age children, generally our foundation phase age children spend around about 2 to 3 hours on their learning, and our key stage 2 children spend around about 3 to 4 hours. That's the sort of general pattern. What's really important about the work that we say is just making sure it's right. Obviously there's a risk sometimes of trying to make the work really accessible, of making it too easy, and, you know, of trying to make the work challenging, of making it too hard as well. You know, it's always about trying to strike that balance as a teacher to stretch those children in an appropriate way. But by and large, our parents are supportive with the level of challenge, and, you know, where it's felt that it's far too easy, far too challenging, we've been able to take on board that information and adapt it. Pupils are really positive. Obviously, what they say immediately when you speak to them about it, whether it's in questionnaire or whether it's in focus group or just on the corridor or whatever, is that they really want to be back in school, and we understand that this learning is different, you know, and it isn't something that we've necessarily chosen. We know that there's lots of really positive things about the way that we are learning now that we will retain when we go forward, but we also know that we do really miss having them on site, and we feel that their learning is different and the progress that they're making is different. So this is the feedback from pupils, and there's lots of things there about they miss breaks on the yard and they miss being with their friends, but generally they really appreciate the opportunity to work with pupils and to see their friends on a daily basis, and to spend, you know, quite a significant proportion of the school day with them. What we did find in earlier iterations of our sort of like teaching and learning plan, if you like, was that when we were just doing check-ins, is that pupils liked it in the first instance, but very, very quickly they were feeding back that the check-in felt a bit samey every day. And even though the content was mixing up, our teachers were doing a fantastic job. What they were essentially articulating to us was that they wanted that to move into learning as quickly as it possibly can, hence, you know, our quite rapid progression into trialling different strategies. There's a lovely example in here as well of a unit that our Year 6 pupils were doing on conflicts, and obviously, you know, a bit of war came into that as one of the points of inquiry from the children. And our Year 6 teacher did a military boot camp under the subtitle of how do we prepare for wartime conflict. And we had lots of parents joining in, and the pupils fed back to us. They thought it was really funny because one of the pupils' parents really pulled a muscle quite badly, and it amused our 10 and 11-year-olds no end. I don't think it amused the dad quite as much, but there we go, it's his choice.
So again, just coming back to this point of communication from the pupils, from parents, we communicate incredibly regularly to our parents and to our pupils with weekly newsletters, bulletins, and we've got a few just really simple principles. There's examples there on screen of some of the communications we've sent out. We've got a sort of a rule of thumb that we try to keep our communications as being one side maximum. And we would like these to be a go-to, quick, user-friendly guide, the sort of thing you can put on the fridge and just refer to, as opposed to having to read very thorough, detailed pieces of text.
So this is to share with you the supporting mechanisms, because obviously, you know, when we're operating in a remote scenario or an on-site with some remote scenario, you know, classes, there's lots of additional things that have to happen to make everything work. And I do realise now, looking at this here, that it sounds like we've got several teams and thousands of staff on site, and I can assure you that that's not the case. But what we've tried to do is we've tried to organise our staff into various different functions. So you'll find that a learning support assistant or a progress coach, as we call them in Nantgwyn, will have a part of their day where they will be on the help team, the attendance team, and on the wellbeing team, for example. So they'll have various different aspects, but these are all the functions that we think really, really help and support the learning and support our children in a more holistic way. We introduced a help team probably about, I don't know, maybe 3 months ago, because what we found was that our teachers were every single day and almost every single lesson having queries from pupils and parents that were about usernames and passwords, and how do I submit this, and how do I find this, and Miss so-and-so set this on Seesaw and I can't find it, can you see where it is? And we just felt that really detracted from, you know, how much focus the teacher could have in the lessons, because obviously, you know, they're very invested in having pupils in the lesson and having information about pupils not being able to get in. It is difficult, and they want to address it straight away. So we have a group of people that's available at all points in time that just deal with queries, and they deal with them as soon as we receive them, generally by picking up the phone and having a chat with the parent to get things sorted. And it extends as far as, you know, doing sort of 45-minute one-to-one demonstrations with a family about, you know, how we need to access Google Classroom and how we organise our work and what the timetable is. We've been really responsive to what our children and what our families need. We've got our support team as well. We've mentioned earlier about the small group work. We have additional members of staff who are allocated at points in time because their roles in schools aren't really happening at the moment, and that's been fantastic for us because we're able to draw on them as additional, as supplementary support to work with children, to work with small groups of children, really, to support their progress. Possibly it's a child or a group of children whose attendance has been lower than we would like it to be, and they're playing a little bit of catch up or recovery as the phrases that we're using at the moment. But that's been a really, really important resource. And the attendance, participation, submission team, as Vicky has said, you know, lesson 1 in the morning, the register's taken, lesson 3, lesson 5, the register's taken. And if pupils aren't in the lesson, then we pick up the phone and we ring them immediately. For some of our older pupils, our 15, 16-year-olds, it's basically waking them up and getting them out of bed sometimes. But for some of our younger pupils, often it's things like usernames and passwords, and they just haven't got round to things, so we just expedite that process really. We have a wellbeing team section as well, and various different members of staff are involved in this. And what's really important to us is that our wellbeing team is for our families and not just the pupils. What we found very early on in lockdown, when we were doing weekly phone calls for all families, but actually greater frequency for some families, is that our parents really appreciated those phone calls, and quite often they felt quite isolated. So we've continued with our conversations with our mums and our dads and our nans and our granddads, because it's what our families need and it's the right thing to do. And by supporting them, we are supporting the children as well.
So just moving forward really at the point we're at now, it's just that continuing refinement of our teaching approaches. So we have forthcoming in the next few weeks, 6 weeks, a peer rounds initiative where we've got groups of staff working collaboratively to observe just elements of best practice, 10, 20 minutes, whereby we will invite other colleagues into our lessons and just say, I want to show you, you know, the prompting I do with my class, or I would like to show you how I'm building pupil relationships online, and it's all centered around our 9 Ps. The teachers have complete control of this. They decide which lesson, which group, what Ps they would like to focus on. But it's really about the fact that there is no rule book for remote learning at all, and we are developing, and actually within schools we are the experts, and we need to start sharing that expertise that we've developed over the last year. It supports individual professional learning needs. So if, for example, I felt that I wasn't able to really differentiate too well online because I haven't really developed that in my practice, it means I can go and observe it and learn from my colleagues and those around me. We're also going to undertake a self-evaluation process, so that again, as a whole school and as part of my remit, I can put in place professional learning that really caters to the needs of individuals at this point in time. Where do we go from here? We need to put in place bespoke, I suppose, provision for our staff, as opposed to when we initially started, which was just we all need to learn how to use Google Classrooms. So just tailoring it a little bit more to individual needs at this point.
Other areas of focus for us at the moment are working with staff to make sure that they've got the opportunity to work with their colleagues to assess children against the Nantgwyn progression pathway, and just to make sure that the assessments that we're doing in remote teaching are as valuable as the assessments that we do when we're on site as well. And that's an ongoing piece of work, and our staff are developing quite a range actually of strategies and approaches that will draw together and synthesise and really distill it into the key points that we will agree across the school to move forward with. The other area of focus for us, and it's one that will be an ongoing area, is making sure that when we are in periods of remote learning, whether it's whole school closure, partial, or just class self-isolation or pupil self-isolation, that we are improving the attendance and the participation and the submission, which is quite critical to make sure that we've got all of that information there for our pupils. But that said, I mean, it's been really helpful for us actually to pull everything together, and it's been a really useful reflection piece of work that Vicky and I to do. I think we probably missed a huge number of details. I think the key thing for us is that we're learning, and we've been learning since day one, and we're still learning now, and we've got an awful lot more to learn. But this is at the moment what we consider to be the right approach for us. And, you know, we have information coming in on a regular basis. In 3 months' time, we will have moved this practice on a little bit. And of course, we, as well as you and everybody else in the education system, will be responding to the next steps of the pandemic as well. But, you know, it's just been helpful for us to pull together the work that we've done to show you what's right for us at this point in time.
Fantastic. Thank you both very, very much for all the work you've shared, but also for your openness and honesty. I got a couple of takeaways for me personally. I love the idea that, you know, this has come through in quite a few of the webinars we've been looking at, that idea of mirroring. You know, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, we're taking what we know works in the classroom and trying to make it work outside of it. But I think my personal win from that one is we keep asking the same questions because the answers change. That's such a sensible and logical way to capture that